Good evening. Welcome once more to Vulture's Rainbow Theatre. Tonight's story is another East Texas tale of the weird and unexplained, written and read by my esteemed colleague, the rustic and inestimable Mr. Annan Imo. Join us as we present this tale of cosmic mysteries, and of the men, both ancient and modern, who are sworn to keep them. Annan, I find the title unpronounceable. Would you do the honors? Sure. This here story is called Pictures and Flying Things by yours truly. Boy, I got me a story I want to tell you about this old farm place. Before it was mine, it was my grandpa's. My grandpa wasn't really a farmer, but he'd been raised on this land by his great-uncle Neff, who really had been a man of the soil, a real pioneer. When Uncle Neff bought 100 acres back in 1910, he'd cleared the pines off it, except for the hilltop, with the help of his cousins and a couple of neighbors. Then he plowed it with mules the old-timey way, going on to plant his cotton, his sorghum, and a vegetable patch near where he planned for his house to be built. He built him a log cabin out of the wood that had been cleared from his land, like the one he'd been raised in back in the foothills of the Ouachita Mountains. Anyway, Grandpa come to live with Uncle Neff when his mama died of influenza, and his daddy, who'd been discharged from the army with Bright's disease, died a year later. This was around 1919, I guess. So Grandpa, not having folks to raise him, come to live with Uncle Neff, and that's where he stayed his whole life. By the time I was born, Grandpa had long since sold half of that 100 acres to Mose Headley and leased what was left of it to a Mr. Dunahee who grew hay for his cows on it. Nowadays, I just pay this old boy to come out and mow it. Shortly after Uncle Neff had died, when Grandpa was 21, Grandpa had gone to work for Goliad Oil and Gas, which later on became a subsidiary of Ranger Corp. He made a career out of working for Ranger Corp and was retired by the time I was old enough to get dropped off at Grandpa's house occasionally, to stay there on my own and be good company for him. By then, the old log cabin was long gone, and a nice double-wide trailer home had been moved onto the property in its place, complete with city water and a septic tank. That's the place you're sitting in right now. Grandpa liked to take me fishing sometimes. The part of Uncle Neff's land he'd kept didn't have no cattle tank on it, but Mose Headley's had two, which were stocked. And Mose Headley didn't mind folks fishing there as long as they cleaned up after themselves and left everything the way it looked before they'd arrived. To get to the tanks, you would climb over the barbed wire fence between Grandpa's place or Mose's, or you could go to the easement that ran across Grandpa's property on the north side, where there was a gate in the barbed wire between his land and Mose's. Mose had put in a cattle guard there, so you had to be careful if you was a little kid like me not to slip a foot through the bars and hurt a leg. Now, Grandpa's land was on the farm to market road, as you can still see, sloping upward away from the highway until it come to Mose's fence. Of course, that fence is gone now, 'cause I bought that land back from his widow, Miss Headley, when I growed up and had money. Anywho, when you got on Mose's side of the barbed wire, the land continued its uphill climb, ending finally in a stand of piney woods which capped the top of the hill. You ain't never been up there, have you? Well, it's still there. That patch of forest has been left alone by folks going way back to when the area was first settled. Not even the lumber companies had gotten to it back in the day when they were shaving the hills clean and sending off the old growth pine to the mills to make into planks and beams. There was one footpath going back into the shadows of those old woods, and Grandpa took me back there a couple of times to see something special and unusual. The top of that hill, it turned out, was a place where layers of rock had erupted from underneath the ground, tearing through the soil to stand exposed and bared through the long ages that had rolled on before people came onto the scene. You ain't been up there to see this yet, but on them rocks, there's pictures that had been scratched into the rough stone, probably by Injuns. When I first seen them as a kid, they looked crude to me, and a lot of them were hard to see unless you was willing to sit still for a long time and really look at them. Some of it I could see was just lines and circles, but here and there were figures that looked like they was supposed to be animals, and there was a couple that looked like stick figures of people, except that they had what looked like maybe deer horns sticking up out of their heads. Now, I was real excited when Grandpa showed me these pictures for the first time, and it was all he could do to keep me from touching them and running my fingers on them. I asked him what they was about. He shrugged his shoulders and said to me, "Taterbug," that was his nickname for me. He said, "Taterbug, whatever folks made these pictures is long since gone to their maker. These was from Indian times, and I bet the meaning of them was secret then. Else why would they put them on rocks back in these trees? Probably only a few Injuns ever knew what they meant, and they all gone now." Sometimes as I got older and had the run of the property without supervision, I went up from time to time to look at them scratches and pictures, to see if I could parse out something from them. But see, even if you look and get an idea about what they might mean, then your mind starts saying, "Yeah, but what about this? What about that?" Then you're back to square one. You don't know any better than you did before, and in front of the great mysteries of ages past, you feel like you ain't worth no more than a stack of beans. Well, my son, your daddy, when he grew up and went to college, he told me them things are called petroglyphs, and for me, those petroglyphs stand for all the things in the world that ain't now and can't never be understood. Some mysteries you just can't crack. And that reminds me of what I was gonna tell you before I got off on these other stories of mine. You got to understand, I'm old. My mind don't focus like it used to. They's something besides the petroglyphs on Moses' property. Something that ain't from millions of years ago, 'cause it arrived in my lifetime. I know that because I saw it come here. And it's just as damn mysterious as them Indian pictures. And that's the story I wanted to tell. When I was about 10 years old, this would have been, 1966, 67 maybe. I was staying out on the farm with Grandpa, for the weekend. Usually in the evenings on a Friday or Saturday, he'd cook up some pork chops, or we'd fry some catfish we'd caught at Moses, and Grandpa would heat up some canned corn in a pot and set out some homemade bread and home-churned butter he liked to buy over at the donut place in Apache Mounds. We'd watch The Man from U.N.C.L.E. or Lost in Space on his black and white TV set and chow down. Nice way to spend a Friday night for a 10-year-old boy of that time and place. Well, this one Friday night, he'd been invited to play dominoes. A game of 84 over at his girlfriend Doris's house. So he trusted me to heat up a TV dinner for myself. He'd be home before 10:30, he said, and that was fine with me. I liked having the place all to myself sometimes. I kept our tradition, eating my Swanson TV dinner in front of the television, watching Lost in Space and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. You probably don't know them shows. One was about a family in the future who went out sightseeing in their spaceship and then got lost. Goes to show you should take a map for a long road trip. Now folks got maps on their phones. But good luck using those around here. There ain't phone service for 50 miles. Man from Uncle? A couple of secret agents with all kinds of fancy gear like that James Bond feller. My favorite device was a transistor radio they had that turned into a machine gun. Some company or other made a toy of that thing, and my folks give it to me for Christmas. Transistor radio, you press a button and out pops a barrel and a stock. Now you're ready to start make-believe killing things. Big fun for a kid in the 60s. After Vietnam, you couldn't buy a kid a plastic squirt gun without the neighbors looking at you like you spit on an altar cross. What's that? Oh, that's right. My mind's wandering again, ain't it? Well, anyway, after dinner and the shows, I decided to step outside and get me a breath of the night air. This was in the fall. Late October, I think, and the air had a nice chill in it. The air was clear and clean, and you could see a zillion stars up in the sky because there weren't no lights out there on our property or Moses. Later on, in the 80s, I think, Texas had a program to stick a light in the yard of every farm in Texas. And since then, if you add all the thief lights and the big lights on poles they put along the farm to market road for the first quarter mile out of Apache Mounds, you're lucky if there ain't a light shining right up the crack of your... Well, you know what I mean. So it was dark and the sky was full of stars. There was a little bit of a glow in the sky coming from the lights of Huff City, but that was just a little gray halo hanging low over the trees east of the road. It was quiet, too. You know, in the summer, East Texas nights are just humming with sound. Frogs, toads, night birds, crickets in September by the bajillions. But when you get this late in the year, it's a lot quieter. And that's when I seen my UFO. You know how in the movies, when there's a UFO invasion, there's all kind of noises. There's that long beeping sound like a sandpiper makes when he takes off. Boop, 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 boop. And there's hums and buzzes. And there was that one movie where the alien ships played music with the Earth guy who had the piano keyboard. Then you got to add in the fizzles and zats from laser guns when them aliens start wrecking shop and try to take over. But what you don't get is what the real thing is like. At least how it was like for me. I'm standing there on that sloping hillside looking off east over the road and the piney woods beyond, and in the glow of that gray halo from Huff City, I see something flying over the treetops. It ain't moving fast, but it is going in a straight line, coming in my direction, and it is completely silent. I mean, you could have heard a snake piss in the grass for all the noise it made, which was none. I can't make out what it is off in the distance. It's too small, and I figure maybe it's a bird, like an owl maybe, that got fed up with the patch where it was hunting and had decided to move to better grounds. It come up over the highway, and now I'm not looking way out straight for it, but starting to crane my neck, because it's for sure going to come flying over the house. As it gets closer, I see that this thing ain't got no wings. And it ain't wobbling or rising or dropping like a bird might do flapping his feathers. It's just coming along straight, and as it gets nearly over me, now mind you, the only light I have is the stars and that gray glow off a ways above the trees. As it gets nearly over me, I see that it ain't a bird at all. It's reflecting light from that gray glow, and you can only see part of it clear at a time, and the rest is just shadowy, kind of lost in the dark with the stars. But it's like I don't know, a couple of big metal diamonds joined together at one of their points. My mind's flipping through all the library books I'd ever read about Air Force planes and model planes and any kind of flying thing that I might have ever heard of, and my mind is trying to find stuff on this thing that might be a wing or a tail, and my ears are trying to pick out a buzz from a propeller or see if there's a balloon that this thing is hanging from. But no dice. It's this double diamond metal thing just flying over the house without making no noise at all. And it's flying low, too. It looks like it might graze the roof of the double wide behind and above me, but it don't. And then off it goes into the dark back there, over our barbed wire fence and then over Mose Headley's airspace. I can't see it no more, even when I run back behind the double wide and scoot up the hill to get to the barbed wire fence. I stop running pretty quick too, because I don't want to run into rusty old barbed wire in the dark and tear myself up out there, me being alone and all. Well, when Grandpa come home, I was all excited about this UFO business, and I tried to tell him about it, and I guess he tried to listen too. But there come a point when he kind of chuckled and said, "Okay now, Taterbug, you gonna have to hold off on this thing and tell me some more at breakfast. We have a long talk about this tonight. Neither one of us is gonna sleep good." Next morning, after bacon and eggs and biscuits with cream gravy, we set off up the hill to see if we could find any signs of the thing that had come flying over the night before. I figured we wouldn't find anything at all. You know, that's usually what happens when there's a UFO. Folks see it and tell stories, but there ain't no evidence, so it's their word against everyone else's. We walk uphill on Moses' pasture land. He's got a few Bramers and polled Herefords out there near one of the tanks, some lying down, one of them switching his tail against his backside to keep flies off the dung, staining his back end. Grandpa's stopping every now and again to get his breath. Once he stops for a long rest, pulling a pack of pell-mells out of his pocket and lighting up, staring off in the direction of the sunrise. The puffs from his cigarette picking up the light from the rising sun for a moment before they disappear into nothing. I'm getting impatient, feeling like a dog who can smell the raccoon, but he ain't got the word yet to take off after it. We figure out after a while that there ain't nothing to see, but we ain't that far from the footpath. "Grandpa, can we go look at the engine pictures?" I asked. "Sure, Taterbug. Let's go have a look. Maybe this morning we'll figure out what they mean." "Right," I said. When we got to the Standing Rocks, it was nice and chilly and shady, and you could feel that cool October breeze coming in through the pines, bringing in that clean smell of land and sky and pine resin. That's the prettiest smell I know, and it's one of the reasons I ain't never left this place. We're staring at the rocks, talking about the pictures like we always do, when Grandpa looks up over his head and says, "Looky there. Lord have mercy." I look up, and there's my UFO. Two diamond-shaped metal things joined together at a point, whole thing only about 15 foot long. There it is, hung up in some branches, way up in a couple of longleaf pines. Now, Grandpa and I knew that this thing was nothing that ever come from Earth. This was something from outer space, and it was made by whatever kind of folks they got living out there in the stars. Green men or tentacle monsters or people like us with big heads or whatever. This was a thing from way out yonder, and here it was sitting up in the tree in full view, if you don't count the branches and pine needles that covered parts of it here and there. Now here's the strange thing. This is something from outer space, from a civilization out there. And what I can't figure out is why the thing, being what it was, just felt so ordinary after a couple of minutes. I mean, you say ooh and aw and look at it, and then, hell, it's just this thing up in the trees. It's metal. We got that here. It's diamond shaped. Any welder worth his salt in East Texas could make something shaped like that if he had a mind to. There ain't nothing written on it. It's dripping condensation just like the pine needles and the branches around it. Grandpa, I said. What's that, Taterbug? Now we got two things here we don't know nothing about, I said. Grandpa looked up at it a long time and then clucked his tongue. Well, double your pleasure, double your fun, he said. When you come up here on other days, it'll still be hanging there. Don't tell nobody about it, otherwise it'll get took down and carried off, and them engine pictures will get ruined with folks putting up ladders and cranes to bring down this flying saucer thing. Or if they see the pictures too and like 'em, they might try to build some kind of damn engine museum up here with a big old parking lot and bright lights. Let's just keep this our little secret. All right, Grandpa, I said. I've kept it secret till now, except for your daddy, of course, and you'll need to decide what you're going to do with it, just like your daddy had to decide. But grandson, there's some things in the world that don't need to be explained or took apart, and they's some mysteries a man was meant to keep in his heart, silent as them pictures up there on the hill, or that thing that flew in to visit us from the stars. You have been listening to Vulture's Rainbow Theatre. Don't forget, if you like tales of horror or just nice fantasy stories, you might consider reading two short novels by my colleague Michael Terlouw that are on Amazon.com as ebooks right now, The Yule Country and Beggar's Night. Also, please remember to check the Vulture's Rainbow Facebook page for announcements of times and places when Vulture's Rainbow, your mobile home of dark art, will be offering strange and wonderful works for your perusal and purchase at very reasonable prices. Until next time, this is Damon Vulture wishing you a good night and dark dreams.